What's going on, homies, and welcome back to the Repster, where movies and entertainment are our reputation. So Total Recall was released in 1990, was directed by Paul Verhoeven, and stars Arnold Schwarzenegger. And the story follows Douglas Quaid, a man who suffers an identity crisis after attempting a virtual vacation to Mars, after which he is hunted, which prompts him to go to Mars itself for real. As promised in my Christmas Eve video, I told you I would do reviews on the 4K movies that I buy, along with the 4K experience itself. So I'm going to go through the normal review that you've seen so many times on this channel, along with the 4K experience, from the look of it, the visuals, the sound, and everything. And there will be spoilers, so if you have not seen this movie, I suggest you rent it or buy it or watch it on YouTube and then come back and enjoy the fun. So let's get started with the positives of Total Recall. The story. It was an enticing story. It's basically about this man who suffers this identity crisis, and he finds out that everything from his job to his wife to his friends, everything is one big giant lie set up by this agency. And he tries to go on a mission to try to figure out why the hell people is trying to kill him. And being an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, it's what you expect. Visceral, you got a lot of shooting, you got a lot of explosions, action-packed, right down to the very bone. It's pretty much what you'd expect. You have a nice little build-up. You have an introduction to Schwarzenegger's character and his wife, played by the very lovely Sharon Stone. You get this nice little introduction that you think everything is going well. He talks to his wife about wanting to go to Mars. He's always dreamed about going to Mars. And his wife is like, you know, this is ridiculous. We've been over this 1,000 times. You'd hated it on Mars and this and that. Trying to get away from the subject and trying to cover up her own butt, if you know what I mean. But it was a nice introduction. It really made you care for the characters. It really made you get enticed into the movie itself. And it was a great introduction, as all movies should have. The entire first act was pretty great, especially the recall scene. You know, he goes to the recall center and wanting to have an implant so he can enjoy his vacation. And then all of a sudden, just shit goes down. And he starts having a aneurysm, or whatever they call it. It's one of those memory breakdowns or meltdowns. And he starts babbling about how you blew his cover and all that when they hadn't even implanted anything. So you knew something was wrong. Something was up. And that whole scene just really gets you enticed. It just ropes you in right away. You're trying to figure out what the hell's going on here. And then they, of course, wipe his memory again. And then he goes back to being the regular Douglas Quaid. And then that's when people start trying to kill him and chasing him and everything. And it's really riveting, including his wife. They don't take it easy on him, that's for sure. It just gets you hooked immediately. And the second act, when he actually goes to Mars to try to figure out what's all going on, that's when the movie really, really starts. Yeah, you get like some nice action sequences and some really nice character development and build up in the first act. I mean, what you'd expect with any movie. But when the second act starts, that's when the story really starts to unfold. And then you find out that there's this guy named Cohagen, played by Ronny Cox, who is a pretty talented actor. I've only seen him in this film, but he did a definite good job in this. But you find out that this guy is pretty much like a dictator over the whole entire planet of Mars. I mean, you have to buy his air because of like the lack of, there's no atmosphere. There's no air on Mars, obviously. How douchey can you get? Then you find out about this reactor that was apparently built by aliens half a million years ago, like 500,000 years ago, that creates air. And of course, Cohagen, being the natural villain that a villain should be, doesn't want anybody to touch it. Otherwise, he'll lose power. So that's basically what you get out of the story. This whole big reactor, it just creates an atmosphere, and it makes it kind of like Earth, which is pretty interesting. It's an interesting concept. Very large scale. Very large scale. And the characters, well performed, especially Schwarzenegger. This was in the prime of his time in Hollywood. That's for sure. This came out in 1990, but by then he had already done films like Terminator, which some of y'all might disagree with me, but I think that's what put him on the map. Terminator, then he did Commando, Raw Deal, Red Heat, The Running Man. I swear, the 80s was the most shining time for Schwarzenegger, that's for sure. And more was to come, especially during the 90s. Then you get Rachel Ticotin, I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, who plays Melina, the sort of the love interest to the other personality of Schwarzenegger's character. She did a really good job. She was also in Con Air, which I also did a review for, but I had no idea she was in that, and I think I know what part she played. She played the guard that was being held hostage along with the others in that film, which I had to take a good close look at that, and I had no idea. So that was pretty interesting. I thought she did a really good job in Total Recall. And as I mentioned before, Ronny Cox, who plays Cohagen, the main villain of this film, he did a really good job. He's one of those villains that you'd love to hate, which is always good to be put in a movie like this. He just plays one of those jerks that just, you have to buy his air. He controls everything, just like a dictator. He was a straight-up dictator in this. There's no other way to put it. There's no disappointments there. Then you have this guy named Richie, who's actually the main leader of the people that's trying to kill Schwarzenegger's character. And he's one of those that has nothing to lose. There are certain scenes where he shoots at the dome when they were in Mars, very stupidly. And this goes to show you how serious this man is and how he doesn't really think before he speaks or acts. But he shoots the dome and like everything gets sucked out, and like some people does as well. Luckily they contain everything, but that's how focused he is in getting this guy. He doesn't care about anything else. And that's what makes him a good villain too. I thought he did a really good job. The only other movie I remember seeing him in was years later in Terminator Salvation. Characters in this was all great. You know, you want a movie that you want to connect with the characters, you want to either hate or love. And that's what this movie did for me. And the tone and pace was perfect. It was excellent. There wasn't a moment that went by that I wasn't hooked. It was a genuine blast. As I said before, this is one of those Schwarzenegger movies that really shined. If you're a Schwarzenegger fan, you'll definitely get into this. You'll definitely get into Total Recall. There wasn't a beat missed in this. It's a genuine action-packed thriller that basically has you on the edge of your seat. Literally. The practical effects they used for the mutants was pretty good. Like, for instance, there was this one guy with a scar on his face that looked pretty cool and had, like, opening in the back of his neck. And you had this woman with a two-face, with one side of her face being normal and the other side being mutated. And not to mention this little child that was kind of the same. So, whoever did the practical makeup effects on that, I gotta give him props. I have to mention the blow-up doll scene. Now I know what you're thinking, and no. I'm referring to the scenes where when the people get sucked out into the Mars atmosphere or to the Mars grounds, there were certain shots where it shows them suffocating. And you see their eyes bug out and their tongues pretty much fall out. Watching those scenes, it kind of did make me laugh a little. It made me giggle because it did kind of look a little silly, but that's not a negative on this at all. It's just basically, one of those things that you knew what you were watching and you couldn't help but laugh, but at the same time, you get it. I mean, there's no air, but the way they perceived it, literally, you knew that those were dolls. You knew those were dummies or whatever they were using, and somebody was squeezing them or blowing them up, which is why I call those scenes the blow-up doll scenes. The blow-up doll scenarios. It just looked really weird when some of the characters, their eyes would bulge out, especially Schwarzenegger's. I couldn't help but laugh. Sorry, but I couldn't help but laugh. But hey, that's all cool. That's fine. I know what they were trying to say. It's just the way it was presented. That's all I'm saying. And you get a great score by Jerry Goldsmith, who sadly passed away back in 2004. But he gave this film a score that pretty much gave it character. The score was basically a character within itself. It was very intensifying. It was very neat, and it just resonated with you. And it was pretty awesome. It's very fulfilling and very compelling. Total Recall was one of those films that had a very rough start. In the mid-'80s, the studio that handled so many movies like Red Heat, they had a pretty rough time by the time the late 80s came around. They were forking out all these action movies left and right, and they started off well, like with any company, but then they started going downhill. And Total Recall was unfortunately in that area, but with scripts being rewritten and tossed from studio to studio because of the original studio's downfall, I guess you could say. You know, they finally found a place at TriStar, I believe. But it's just one of those that kind of ended up in development hell, which Hollywood is no stranger to for so many projects. But it all worked out good. We got a great film anyway. I think this film was in the works for like 5 years before it finally came out. But it all worked out for the best. We got a great action film with a great star, which was another problem that they had, which was like casting choices. Schwarzenegger was big, but they wanted others in the first place. You know, how some of these big major studio suits sometimes wants to, you know, give their own opinions, which it's their job, but sometimes they'll come up with like actors that you wouldn't never think would take up this part, knowing the choices they made after all. Again, we got a great action picture and everything worked out for the best. Total Recall is a fun and exciting ride full of adrenaline-pumped action, great characters, and a story to die for. It's Reptastic. Now let's talk about the 4K restoration of the film. It was awesome. The red really popped, especially in the Mars scenes where it shows the outside part of Mars itself. You really tell the difference between the 4K restoration, especially in those scenes, compared to the regular Blu-ray, which was released several years ago. It really popped. The coloring was amazing. It really brought a sense of visuals and value to the restoration. Director Paul Verhoeven and Studio Canal was in charge of the restoration of this, and I gotta say, they did a really excellent job. They went over it with a fine-tooth comb, that's for sure. You get the brightest colors, the deepest darks ever imagined, and it's just one of those where even in the dark scenes you can still tell what was kind of going on, because some of these 4K releases you can't really tell what's going on because they make it a little bit too dark, which is the only downfall for 4Ks I have. But I quickly get over it because I'm going to be a fan of it until whatever else next comes out. But they really did a good job on the 4K aspect. It really brings out the realism of it. It just made the movie all the much better. This movie was actually, of course, shot on 35mm. So for something like this to be finely tuned and finally upgraded to how it looks, which is amazing, is a definite improvement, and it really speaks out to the technology that Hollywood has nowadays, which is amazing and really, really good, really great. And I would have saved this next portion for the review itself, but how much more could I have said anyway? But the look and feel of this film, because of the 4K aspect, was truly, truly amazing. It was very radiant looking, you know, especially the chase scenes and the explosions and the gunfire scenes. It just all popped for me. It's as if I was watching the movie for the first time, even though I've watched it 1,000 times before on VHS and DVD, Blu-ray, and now this makes probably the third, fourth, or fifth time watching it since I got the 4K. That's how good it is. I mean, like I said, the Mars scenes really stood out with its red coloring, the way the rocks looked, the black darkened spots in those scenes, in those same scenes. It really stood out. It made you feel like you were actually there. Very, very radiant looking. The only problem I have, which is no big deal because I'm still a huge fan of this 4K release and the movie itself, but in the scenes where they were just talking and it's just mostly about dialogue, which is fine, but in those scenes, you do kind of notice a little bit of the grainy areas, that it kind of like fails a little bit in that area. But for the most part, the action scenes, because there's so much of it, really makes up for it. But those grainy scenes, I couldn't help but notice that most of those scenes were just the dialogue. It was a little grainy, but beggars can't be choosers. Bottom line, when shit goes down in this film, all the action and the shooting and the explosions, it really pops out. The 4K really shines and shows its true, may I say, colors. Then you get a really great, awesome sound, 7.1 Dolby Atmos, which most of the other releases doesn't have. It really popped if you have one of those big surround sound, 7.1 surround sound systems in your home, and you pop this in and you turn it up to however loud you can stand it. It really feels like you're actually in the theater. I mean, you hear every sound, you hear every crackle, you hear every gunshot, every explosion, everything that you hear. And again, like I said, it makes you really feel like you're inside the movie with everything happening, with everything going on. It's truly great. It's a great experience. And if you're so used to watching the Blu-ray, if you watch the Blu-ray so many times, you'll definitely know a definite difference. Not only with the sound, but with the coloring and the picture, of course. You'll definitely notice a difference in terms of quality and sound, especially if you have all the necessary equipment for 4K. Plus, you get all sorts of special features. You get something that's called Total Recall: How Carolco Changed Hollywood documentary, which is basically the studio that I couldn't remember who released this, and so many others that went bankrupt when this was out. It was like the brink of it. So you get a little nice history, back history on that. And you also get Open Your Mind scoring, which tells about Jerry Goldsmith's scoring of this film. And you also get Dream Within a Dream, developing Total Recall, which is all on the 4K disc. And you get others like Total Recall, the special effects featurette, the Making of Total Recall featurette, which is only on the Blu-ray. And basically you get like the slip covers, not to mention the slip cover, of course. And this had a digital copy in it, but I already used it. And it's basically a 3-disc set. So you get all that. But bottom line, this is a pretty good sale. It's definitely worth it. And I should recommend you picking this up. Not just for the movie, but for the 4K experience itself. Because it is out of this world. So, Total Recall. Have you seen it? What was your thoughts on it? Did you like the story? Did you like the action characters? Is this your favorite Arnold Schwarzenegger movie? Or do you prefer any of his others? Leave me a comment down below and give me your thoughts. Thank you so much, guys, for sticking through and listening to me whine and grind and big. And you know what to do. Like, subscribe, and comment if you hadn't already. Share. And I'll see you on the next one. Peace the rep out.